Since I'm the oldest, I'm going to start. I am 85 years old. I spent 38 years as a teacher and administrator in the Ridgefield school system. Got my doctorate in my 60s, went on to teach at Westcon. Taught there for 25 years, still working part-time. And I am a professor emeritus of education and women's studies. So those are the two areas I'm really going to be talking about today. And you are going to be getting a handout, which I put together. I'm going to talk to the handout. But when you look at the handout, it's like, why did it take so long for so much of this to happen? Now, actually, women's rights have been going so backward. But this summer was actually a little encouraging, I thought. The women are beginning to fight back against the ban on abortion. I see these women, lawyers and attorneys and judges, many women of color, fighting the corruption in our government. The Barbie movie was great. It got women talking about issues, and it was written by a woman. And I'm not a concert goer, but I love Taylor Swift and Beyonce for what they were able to do. And Simone Biles at 28, and Coco, the tennis player, making $3 million. You know, Alice Paul said, the great suffragette, we take 3 steps forward and go 2 back. And that's what we're still doing. And I want to start with 3 really important times in history, going back to the 1700s. Seneca Falls, Finger Lakes, farm women. Here we had Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, fighting for the right to vote. Why? Their husbands would die and they would be left with nothing. They had no rights. They were thought of as just women. So therefore, the land, the farm would go to their son, their uncle, their grandfather, a brother, anyone but them, and they started the fight. And then the fight didn't get them very far. So Alice Paul, 40 years she lived in Ridgefield. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was her inspiration. We had Elsie Hill, 70-acre road in Ridgefield, one of the top fighters for women's rights, the women of Vassar. There were so many that finally got us the vote. In 1920, 28 countries, nowhere near as advanced as we were, had women right to vote before us. And you gotta love Rosie the Riveters, 1940. They took the jobs from men, did just as well as men. When men came back, only 9% kept their jobs. Now, the other women, though, were motivated. So what did they do? They became teachers, secretaries, nurses, and clerks. All women's jobs. All low pay because they were women's jobs. I want to go back to the one-room schoolhouses. The people, the students went from age 6 to 14. 14, they had reading, writing, math. They had to go into the workforce. Who taught students in the one-room schoolhouses? Men. But then men said, wait a minute, I can go into the trades, I can go into business, I can be a professional. Why am I being a teacher? So it left education to the women, and for years it was the unmarried sisters, the old maids that had the teaching jobs. Girls didn't go to college, they went to seminaries. Catherine Beecher, Harriet's sister in Hartford, started a very famous one. What did they learn at the cemetery? 1/3 religion, 1/3 domestic. Engineering, they called it, and then 1/3 classics in reading, writing, and math. Oberlin in 1837 was very forward-thinking, the very first college to really open for women. It was 100 years later before the others began to open for women. Oh, the Ivy Leagues, they were the last. But they decided what they would do would have separate women's colleges. So we had Radcliffe with Harvard, and we had Barnard with Columbia, and so on, but the courses were not equal. Well, in 1850, we had two wonderful men, Horace Mann and Melville Dewey in particular. They decided you needed more than just age 14 education to teach. They said we need normal schools. Normal comes from the French word practicing teaching. So they started normal schools where you learned about curriculum and standards and how to work with students in developmental levels. A very interesting story. If you've been on White Street in Danbury, you go to Westcon, there's an old building, Old Main, 3 stories high. 2 of these stories, Danbury Normal School. Westcon started as a normal school, 30 women, 2 men. The 30 women became teachers, the 2 men became administrators. I don't know if any of you have heard of Ruth Haas. Anyone heard of Ruth Haas? Yes, one person. Did you go to Westcon?
I came from Denver, and she was head of Family Teachers College.
Right. And Dr. Ruth Haas, 45 years at Westcon, changed it from a normal school to a university, became the very, very first woman in the entire United States to be president of a private institution. Is this spectacular? Do you hear that, Dr. Ruth Haas? Absolutely not. Well, going back to normal schools, you might as well have been a nun. You couldn't be married, you couldn't be dating, you couldn't go to dances, you could go to parties, you couldn't be seen in a car with anyone but your brother or your father, you couldn't wear makeup, you had to have long hair and long skirts, you couldn't smoke, you couldn't drink. Well, these women in 1920, as teachers, made $38 a month, and if they lasted for 5 years, which most of them did, they got a dollar raise. Well, in the 1900s, people said, no, teaching isn't easy. You really need a 4-year degree. And many of the normal school people were grandfathered in. Again, any man went into administration mostly. It wasn't until 1967 that there was equal pay for men and women if they were on the same teaching level. Many of the administrators negotiated their salary. I went to Westcon in 1996. We negotiated our salaries. We learned that the starting salary for a man was at least $35,000, higher than a woman, and it probably still is today. Back in my day, girls married their high school sweetheart, and hopefully they lived happily ever after. It wasn't always so. And women that went to college, what happened to them? They all went to college till they met their husband. They had their Cinderella wedding, their diamond ring, their house with a white picket fence. They were set for life, or so they thought. You've never seen Mona Lisa smile. With Julia Roberts, it shows exactly that. As a college professor, she could not get women to stay in college. Many of the colleges even said, done, you're married. Ruth Bader Ginsburg. What an amazing example for women. Oh my God, she was married, she had kids, she went to Harvard, she went to Columbia, she wrote for the law reviews, she graduated top of her class, she couldn't get a law a job in law. She could not be a lawyer. She could not be a lawyer. She had to do research and teach until she worked her way up and fought her whole life for women's rights. So that gives you a little bit about the history, and then I'm going to tell you about some of my personal experiences, and I'm going to turn it over to Jean.
So I have been fortunate to work in the reproductive rights world, and in Connecticut, that's terrific because Connecticut has played a major role. But we need to put it in context of time. You had so many people women working on abolition. That was successful. We finally had slaves freed, and then they began to organize for the right to vote in 1920. And so once that happened, then women began to think, we need to do more than that. We need to control our fertility. Connecticut had the most stringent law in the entire country. In 1879, the use and prescription of any form of birth control was criminal, doctor and patient. So you have the abolition, you have the right to vote, and now women are getting organized around their fertility. Margaret Sanger was instrumental. In 1921, she opened her first clinic in New York City. So that was incredibly exciting. And in 1923, she visited Hartford. And Hartford was an unusual city. The tobacco growers in the north of the city brought Puerto Rican women up to work on the farms. And the Hispanic Health Council was founded, and I'm not sure of the date, but many of those women were sterilized because pregnancy would interfere with their work cycle. So that, to me, was remarkable. As remarkable as that awful thing was that the birth control pill was tested on 897 Puerto Rican and Hispanic women, and they did not know what drug they were taking. So there's so many things about women that are interesting. Anyway, so Margaret Sanger comes, then wonderful women in Hartford decided to form the Connecticut Birth Control League. And it was people like Kit Hepburn, Katharine Hepburn's mother. There were just so many wonderful people that got it together. Helen Hermes was from Reading, was just such an avid supporter of Planned Parenthood. So they opened a clinic, and no one arrested them. Then they opened another clinic in Norwalk, and a clinic in New Haven, and a clinic in New London, and they were not arrested. Then Waterbury. So we all know in Waterbury, there's a great big cross. And there was just a small announcement in the newspaper that said a clinic was going to be opened, and it would be open to all women, and it was spotted by the Catholic Church. And after an enormous amount of pressure, the clinic was closed. Then comes the Second World War. Women are at work. There's Rosie the Riveter. They're filling the code breakers, many of them women. I mean, these exciting jobs, and they did them beautifully and earned more money. End of the Second World War, they're told they should go home. And it did not sit very well. So I was thinking of another job that was open to women, eventually with social workers. At Smith, I was told not to learn to type because then I would have to be a secretary. So the culture is absolutely in place. All right, so after the Second World War, Planned Parenthood of Connecticut is formed. And they have two goals. One goal is to open clinic and provide services for all women, married and unmarried. The second goal is to get arrested because they knew they had to take the case to court. So they found that Estelle Griswold opened the clinic in New Haven, and Dr. Lee Buxton was the physician, and he said, wealthy women always have access to care. It's poor women that have no access. They found the perfect patient. Her name was Joan Forsberg. She was a Yale divinity student. She was the mother of 3 children. And she went in, she asked for the birth control pill. This was in 1961. The FDA had just approved it in 1960, and on the backs of the poor Hispanic women. And so she went in and she was given a prescription, and then she held a press conference. So I need to read the wording on what the arrest was. They were formally charged. They did assist, abet, counsel, and cause, this was just married women, to use or drug or instrument for the purpose of preventing contraception. Well, Planned Parenthood was thrilled that they'd gotten arrested because they knew they had the court case and they had the lawyer. Catherine Rohrbach, and the name should be familiar to you all because that family has had such an amazing legacy of judicial participation in Connecticut for years. She managed to go to Mount Holyoke, but she also was a 1948 Yale School graduate, law school graduate. So she took the case to the Supreme Court. And that was the case in 1963 that established women's right to privacy. And it's so many court cases are based on her efforts. She is remarkable. The next case, there were cases intervening. There was one on the chastity law of Massachusetts that got overthrown. And then eventually there was Roe v. Wade. And of interest to us who are from Connecticut, Senator Blumenthal clerked for for Justice Brennan, who wrote the opinion. So his defense of women's rights to choose as fundamental to his being. The decision was 7-2, and for 50 years that held. It was when I was president of Planned Parenthood in 1991, we codified Roe in our state. So while we had to fight back some incursions, on the whole, we have established the right for women to choose. So in a few minutes, I will tell you my personal journey through all this political stuff.
Okay, this is my personal story. I was the only one in my neighborhood who went to college. I was the only one that went on to have a career in education full time. The women in the neighborhood would say very openly to me, I mean, you're neglecting your kids. What are your kids going to be like when they grow up? I mean, I can't believe how you are sacrificing your family for your career. It just wasn't something that women did at the time. Well, next fight was to get a job because they still saw women as not being married. And I was told openly again, we're looking for someone that's not married. When you're married, you have kids, the kids get sick, and then you have more kids, and then you have to take a leave, and then your husband gets transferred, and you're not a good risk. And I couldn't believe, now you can't say things like that to people. But back then, they would put it right out in your face. Also, it wasn't until the 1970s that women could help the family get a mortgage. They would only look at a mortgage on what the husband made. We were temporary. We were second class. We were almost invisible. And I remember trying to get a credit card. You couldn't get a credit card because you were married and your husband had a credit card. So why would you need a credit card? I mean, I can't believe what the single women went through who didn't have anyone. And of course, for the vote in earlier years, you know, you would have voted the way your husband would have anyway. So why do you need the right to vote? Well, then I got pregnant. Okay, so what happens when you get pregnant? Well, what would happen is you could not show a baby bump. So you could teach until you saw a baby bump. Then you would have to wear, you know, we didn't have Spanx and all this. You would wear a girdle, and you were so uncomfortable wearing a girdle so that your baby bump wouldn't show. And then when could you get back into teaching? When the baby bump was no longer there. Now, also, when you came back to the male principal to see whether your baby bump had gone away, he could say, well, the job is no longer available. There was no security, and there was certainly no maternity leave where you got any pay while this was going on. Also, what I found was so difficult, I taught young children at the time, and you had to wear a skirt or a dress and nylons. We needed to have pants. We were on the floor, we were playing games, we were doing all sorts of physical activities. And I remember I spent more money on nylons than I did on anything else. We didn't have pantyhose. These were nylons that were expensive. They ran easily. And if you had ones in your nylons and you weren't able to change, you were sent home and you were docked a day's pay. You know, girls today can't believe some of these rules that we had to go on. And as far as leadership, we might have small leadership jobs, not, you know, major like principals and that type of thing. And my principal said to me, Darla, we think you have a potential for leadership. You're very shy. People can't believe that now. You're going to Toastmasters. We want you to learn how to speak. You don't swell at parent conferences and everything. I went to Toastmasters and I was blown away. No podiums, no notes. I mean, it was amazing. And I said afterwards, I'm going to join. And they looked at me and said, this is a men's club. You can't join Toastmasters. We thought you were going to start a Toastmasters club. I said, no. My father had been very wise. He said to me, you know, Darla, if you get into trouble, say, I think I'll talk to my lawyer, or let me see the bylaws. I said, you know, see the bylaws? Oh, there was nothing in the bylaws about women, because why would women need to speak? I mean, they were housewives. They let me in, they put me to hell for 3.5 years. I mean, they totally humiliated me, but they built my strength, and I stood up against them. I would never be the person I am today without Toastmasters. And I became the first woman Toastmaster in Connecticut. Today, 67% of the women, the club is run by Toastmasters. I also joined Power Squadron. I had a boat. I learned how to do everything, navigation and engine repair and reading charts. I couldn't believe it at the end. I got a certificate to join the Women's Auxiliary. The men became the boaters and went out on the water. I tried to fight it. I didn't get anywhere. At that time, you couldn't join Rotary, Kiwanis, Lions, golf clubs. Clubs were for men only. They were so exclusive. I was allowed to be an acting assistant superintendent in Ridgefield. I was not allowed to apply for the real job. They wanted men for the real job. If they couldn't find a good man, they would pin a woman occasionally. In the 1950s and 60s, we were dealing with civil rights, Board versus Board of Ed, Ruby Bridges, Little Rock, and so on. In Connecticut, we didn't deal with that. But we did try for busing in alternative schools, magnet charters, anything we could. But We really weren't successful. And I want to tell you the story of Danbury High School right now today. Every city in Connecticut has 2 or 3 high schools. Danbury has 1, with more students than are at Westcott. There's almost 4,000 students in that one high school. 76 languages are spoken. There are mental health problems, special needs, immigration. Are those kids getting the same education as in Reading and in Ridgefield? I don't think so. Well, in the 1970s, Title IX came. This is going to solve everything. Oh, I don't think so. You know, it was a beginning. It took many years. You know, boys could now take home ec and girls could take shop, and girls were led into higher level science and math classes, and we were going to have equal teams. Well, I was affiliated with the tennis team. We got a parent volunteer to be the coach. We had no money for equipment or uniforms. And when it came to scheduling, the boys scheduled first. What was left over was for the girls. It was a beginning, but it took at least 10 years to fight for what the boy had. We also, in the 70s, started with book banning. We're banning the same books today, except for gay. We didn't have gay books back then. And I don't know if anyone remembers the John Birch Society.
Oh, yeah.
They had headquarters in Ridgefield. They were so far right, I couldn't believe it. I never thought I would have a problem with it. I was given this amazingly difficult senior class of 25 boys. The principal said, do whatever you want. I'm not going to observe you. Order what you want. I ordered the daily news. We used the driver's manual. We used classic comic books, trade magazines with cars. Oh, I did anything I could with these men. Somebody heard I was using the daily news. They weren't about to read the New York Times. They took me to task at the Board of Ed. They wanted me fired. They did everything to get me fired. Luckily, I had scores. I had testing, I had journals, I had scrapbooks. I could prove that these students were learning. They visited my class. My class, oh my God, were like angels, because they knew that if I got fired, they might get somebody else that would not teach in this manner. I was not in the public school system when the school shootings started. I couldn't believe what these teachers were now going through. This was so difficult. I had worked on an Amistad project with Dawn, the principal of Sandy Hook, who was killed. I had student teachers that went through Sandy Hook. It was one of the most wonderful little schools that I can possibly think about. We have started programs, Be Kind, Compassion, and so on. Whether we are making a dent, yes, we're making a dent, probably with the students who come from families who already promote this. I don't know about the rest. In the year 2000, oh my goodness, so much is taken out of the heart of education. The Common Core came in, standardized testing, all kind of assessments taking weeks at a time. We looked at students as numbers. We went back to lockstep teaching. Everyone in 5th grade will be on this lesson on this particular day. They took the creativity, the fun, what education was all about, and so many people couldn't take it and retired early. Luckily, Johanna Hayes, Connecticut Teacher of the Year, became a senator. And we need more people who have been in education and know what really happens to be there. It's mostly the women that are standing up and fighting for us. Johanna, oh, she's amazing. She's fighting for low pay. We need higher pay. Maybe now that there's a shortage of teachers, the pay will go up. I don't know. The lack of respect that we get as public school teachers. People say to us, why are you on teaching? You could be doing so much more. The overload of assessment. If anyone has been in a classroom and seen what inclusion is like, it's so difficult. All of the assessment, the mental health problems, the stress, the gun control. This is what Joanna and all of our teachers are fighting today. Today, many more women than men are graduating from college. I don't want to see this. I want to see equal numbers graduating from college with places to make a difference. You know, today I have a badge on it that says fight for equal rights. I am so for fighting for equal rights. In 1984, we came 3 state votes from getting the Equal Rights Amendment passed. Today, we're not fighting for equal rights. We're just fighting for democracy. And that is so very sad. And I'm sorry if I've been too emotional, but it does to me what we're going through and what I see in the future. If women, and it's going to be the women, I think, in many cases, that could make the difference.
Thank you. After the pill, after Roe, the far right began to organize. For the first time under Reagan administration, we had a national day of prayer that had never been part of our culture before. And we live in this extraordinary country that tried to separate church and state. And yet there's always that energy that wants them to be aligned like every other country. And it is up us to just to keep working at it. So I got to participate in, first I have to read you this one thing. Dr. Benjamin Spock wrote, when women are encouraged to be competitive, too many become disagreeable. And the other day I was called a badass, and I thought, yes, that's really not a bad thing to be called. So after we codified Roe, I was no longer president of Planned Parenthood, but the national organization and the state organizations of Planned Parenthood began to sense that there was something very different happening. We were having schools, big battles on education curriculum. We could see the pickup and the demonstrations at the clinic were, we were all serving as people walking in, patients, and it was going through a gauntlet. And I think those demonstrators are still out there, but we could sense that there was something different. So I was asked if I would do opposition research for Planned Parenthood. And we formed an alliance with the Anti-Defamation League, the Connecticut Civil Liberties Union, some of the gay and lesbian organizations, and we began to go to Christian Coalition training meetings, Crusades for Christ, and I always say my biggest worry was what I would wear. And somebody said, Jean, just go to Talbot's and you'll be fine. So, anyway, we could see and we could hear what was happening. We knew that locally, all these organizations were being supported with enthusiasm and a great deal of money by national organizations, and we didn't quite know what to do. I want to give you an example, one case Veronica Birrell, who was the world's most wonderful English teacher in Brookfield. Mother of 6, Catholic, mass every Sunday. She had a homeroom, and she had a sign on her door that said there would be no disparaging, it was a symbol, and there no disparaging remarks on ethnic orientation, ethnic, religion. It was going to be a warm space. Well, a little girl went home and told her parents, and her parents, the Hoods, accused Veronica of recruiting homosexuals. Because I had been working in this coalition, I was asked to come in and help organize the community. And we asked for a retraction, and instead of a retraction, they had a press conference. So we sued them for defamation. I found a lawyer, we raised money, and then it got scary because the legal arm, the Christian Coalition, came in to support the parents. And Veronica and I were really scared. Like, this is big time stuff. They have money. We were just this little group. But we just kept working. We kept raising money. We kept being the lawyer. And finally it went to trial. And it was one of those things. It never happens that something just begins and ends. The judge looked at the parents and said, "You have defamed a fine English teacher, and you were going to pay her some money." I never did find out how much they paid her, but Veronica left that building. We held up the check and said, "This money is going to the very organizations that support gay and lesbian rights." So, but it was that, on the ground, we could see happening, and then at the national level, all that support. So then, okay, what do? We can work on these little projects. I began a political action committee called IMPACT, Independent Majority Political Action in Connecticut. And that's when I finally learned it's money that matters. I was really naive, I think. I thought, we'll just tell somebody it's wrong and they'll want to change it. No, it's money that changed things. So we had a ball. Initially, we gave money just to women, and then we ran out of them, and then we started giving money to men and women, but it was all the big names, Blumenthal and Murphy, and so it was wonderful because we had their ear. In order to create change, we need to have their ears. So that was fun. And then we started a little organization, and I went through $100,000, which was awful, of other people's money. We saw that the far right was really working. They do talking points, and they hammer you with that talking point. And what do? We provide 40 pages on the impact of poverty on third graders in one city. And nobody reads it, and it doesn't impact them. So we started doing one page to just try and bludgeon them back. But we weren't ready for that. There was no real belief that this was happening in our state. I worked with Rick Hartford, who was a photojournalist from the Hartford Current. He went out to Ohio for the annual gathering of all the militias in the country. He came back completely terrified, and there were 3 militias in Connecticut. So it is here. We always need to work. We are fortunate, but it doesn't end. The impact of the pill, the impact of the women's movement, the backlash we are feeling about that is so strong. I just think we have to pick and choose our causes. I was asked after that to start organizing patients to be a voice in healthcare debates. And that's when I learned it's one thing to be with somebody who fundamentally believes something different. It's even worse when there's money behind them. I did one year we thought, well, we'll have the pharmaceutical industry release how much they pay for different doctors. It's an enormous amount of money. Well, the pharmaceutical industry my lobbyist was so angry. They hired every other lobbyist in the building, and Bobby kept saying, I'm the only one without money this year. But it was after 3 years and working with the Attorney General, who was Blumenthal at that time, all we got was a commitment to have a code of ethics, and that was just be registered at the Attorney General's office, completely without any value. So I've had fun some years, and other years I haven't, but I just know now. I was saying I'm working on medically assisted dying because I feel that at the end of life, I would like to have a choice if I am very ill on, I don't want to get sucked into that system. So thank you all. I can't believe you came on such a beautiful day, and I'm so glad I got to know you better.
This was fun.